I was a chubby little kid going into South Stokes, and junior year made the varsity team, but didn't start the first couple of games. A lot of people think when you've gone to the level that I was fortunate enough to make it to, that you had to be great all the time. Well, I was a late bloomer. I had to overcome asthma. I had to overcome psoriasis and eczema, a lot of skin issues, and everything that was challenging made me tougher. In basketball and certain levels of any kind of competitive sport or success, acting, whatever, you just can't take. You have to give. So when you're out there and you're looking to change your life or do something or overcome adversity, you have to give of yourself first. Then things will come back to you. You have to be a friend to get a friend.
Hey everyone, this is Rod Cade and welcome to this week's episode of Rocket Motivation. This week's guest is going to talk about his life and the multiple adversities he's overcome. He was a 4-year starter on the Duke University basketball team from 1977 through 1981. He's revered as one of the hardest playing players to ever play at Duke, earning him the nickname of Crash. He played 3 seasons in the NBA for the Kansas City Kings and the Denver Nuggets. During his second year in the NBA, he was diagnosed with testicular cancer, but he'll tell you that was just one of several life challenges he's overcome. You're going to hear a story of talent, perseverance, and about a life well lived.
3, 2, 1.
Ken Dennard, welcome to Rocket Motivation.
Thank you, Rod, for having me. It's a pleasure, honor, and not all the times do I get to give back a lot to others who, we always do interviews of former players, whatever. We talk about our basketball days or whatever, but I like the attitude and I like what you're doing for people.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. And full disclosure for the listeners. So Ken and I are both graduates of South Stokes High School in Walnut Cove, North Carolina, and both lived in King, North Carolina. Ken's 7 years older than I am. Until last week, we had actually never spoken to each other. So Ken, if you would tell the listeners kind of where you are now in your life, your career, your family, what you do, kind of get us up to speed.
Sure. 62 years old and happy to be on the planet for sure. I've got an investor relations firm, which is kind of like a PR firm, but focused on Wall Street. I've owned that since 1997. And so I wake up every morning and say, there's nobody but me and all the people that work with me, no boss except all my clients. So I've worked hard to get here, but the pandemic has opened all of our eyes as to how fortunate we are to be able to have a home and to have a place to live and eat and have friends that we can communicate with. Obviously, it's been a long journey. I grew up in Winston-Salem and moved out to King when I was in the 6th grade. I was the 4th of 4 boys, so I got beat up all the time. That kind of made me who I am today. And my brothers were always great athletes, and I was always either Emery's brother or Tommy's brother or David's brother. So my goal in life was to overcome everything and them to be my brother. So going to Duke and having a career there and getting in the NBA, I was fortunate enough to be able to live that dream. I was a late bloomer. I had to overcome asthma. I had to overcome psoriasis and eczema, a lot of skin issues, and everything that was challenging made me tougher.
You had some struggles early on, and one right when you were an infant. If you would tell the listeners, about the first struggle you had.
Yeah, well, I don't remember it because I was an infant, but the story goes when I was just a few weeks old and my mother put me on formula for whatever reason. I had allergic reaction to milk and had immediate physical reaction to where I actually almost died. I was in an oxygen tent they put over the little crib or whatever for 8 weeks and stayed in the hospital. My mother, the God-fearing Southern Baptist she was, she didn't go to church for a year, but also with this asthmatic or this attack that I had, it also gave me huge scales all over my body. I was like a little lizard baby. In fact, my dad told me, I didn't know this story until I had my own son in 1995. He said, don't ever give him milk, and because here's what happened to you. And he told me the story. He said, my mom would pick me up out of the crib. This is after I was out of the hospital and I survived. And they would take their hands and scrape the scales. They were like big scales, I had dehydrated and my whole endocrine system. And, so for years I had psoriasis in my hair and didn't take off my hat. And well, now I don't have any hair, but back then it was a real embarrassment to have psoriasis under your fingernails and psoriasis on your elbows and on your knees and on your ankles. It was really kind of, you see all the Heartbreak of Psoriasis commercials. Well, I was a living evidence of that. But, again, it was something that I learned how to handle. The childhood asthma was probably the worst. But the best lie my mom ever told me that I didn't know was a lie till I was older is that you don't die from asthma. You can't die. So we had some really nasty medicine back then. But, I suffered a lot trying to play sports. It was difficult. But the thing about perseverance and tenacity and being the fourth of four boys where you get picked on, you just put it behind you. You put it in the back of your head and you fight forward. And that's what I did. Little did I know that when I finally hit puberty, my junior year in high school, that I was going to have to work out twice as hard to be at the same physical level as my peers. So guys could go out and work out. I'd have to work out twice as hard to get to the same physical conditioning with oxygen intake and all that because of my asthma. But that just made me want to do it harder. I remember running up the hills, that road going up to top of Sartown Mountain. I used to train running up that hill. I'd run up 100 yards and walk back 50, run up 100 and walk back 50 until I threw up. And Randy Newsom, who was my buddy back then, was working out with me. And he goes, "You're crazy. Why do you put yourself through this?" And then, because that's what I have to do. Back then, they didn't have the same training. Nobody knew what anaerobic or aerobic conditioning was. Nobody knew much of anything on the science of conditioning in the 60s and 70s. So I was really lucky that I had to overcome those things because it gave me a good work ethic and it gave me a real determination. And I was able to find a place in my head that when I was excelling at the sport, whether it was football, baseball, basketball, which later became basketball focused, I found a place there that I had no issues. If I was in shape and I was ready and had teammates that were positive, you could accomplish anything. So that's really kind of how I overcame all that childhood stuff and was able to, once I hit puberty and started to grow taller and lose the baby fat, I was able to make a run and in the next couple of years, I wound up at Duke. So just shows you how fast things can change.
And when you go off to Duke, you told me there were some sports writers. I think one of the local sports writers in Winston-Salem may have not been so complimentary about your skills. Kind of something else you needed to overcome, I guess. Tell us that story.
I had no expectations of being, the best player or whatever during those early years. My junior year, I had a good year. And then over the summer, I played real well up at a 5-star camp and got recruited. So my senior year, I had a real nice opportunity to not worry about being recruited because I'd already committed to Duke. And this one writer for the Winston-Salem Journal, I'm not going to say his name because, I don't even know if he's still alive. When I went to Duke on full scholarship, he made a $100 bet with one of the reporters in Durham that I would never score 100 points in my career at Duke. So that was how highly he thought of me. Again, another challenge when you can't do something, you can't play sports. I remember doctors telling me when I was a kid, I was allergic to grass, but I played football and just wheezed myself through it. I couldn't play in high school. I wasn't going to make it. I said, I am going to make it. And then others say, you're not going to make it at Duke. And then they said, you're not going to make it to the pros. So the only guy that I remember the most besides my family that believed in me was Dean Smith. Ironically, Dean Smith was one of my biggest fans, and he was always complimentary of me and had nice words to say to me. We'd always see each other before games. We'd walk by each other, and he was just an awesome guy. And I got to know him a little bit more after Duke. But I mean, for me, I guess it worked out okay. I was never what you would say the best player. Typically, I was always having to work harder and try harder, which that made the game that I had part of this team at Duke that was an integral part of the team that they needed. I wasn't Gene Banks or Mike Tominski or Jim Spinarkle, but I was me. So it worked out pretty well. And I really had to learn my role at Duke. One story I will share. I was recruited by Wake Forest because I grew up not far from there in Winston-Salem before we moved to Stokes County. And so when I chose Duke over Wake Forest, they weren't very happy because they had let me play in their gym all the time in the summers and, play with all their players. One of the assistant coaches sent me a Christmas card my senior year after I'd already picked Duke over Wake. And he said, "Dear Ken, I hope you have as good a Christmas next Christmas as you are this Christmas. Signed, Coach, whatever." I'm not going to say his name. It wasn't Coach Tacey. It was one of his lackeys. So that was motivation. So the first time I get to play against Wake Forest in the Big Four tournament, I went 5 for 5 from the field and 5 for 5 from the free throw line, and we beat them. So on the walk off the court, when I walked by that coach, I looked at him. He's a short little guy, and I said, "Hey, this Christmas is going to be good." And he kind of slunk away like a little weasel.
Well, and we need to close the story on the bet that the sports reporter made. He did lose his bet that you would not score under 100 points in your career at Duke, didn't he?
Yeah, I scored over 1,000. That's right.
I didn't want to leave that just hanging out there without, the listeners maybe thinking, well, who won the bet? And
I may have gotten 100 points against Wake Forest.
Yeah. Ken, let me ask you this. I want to make sure the listeners know too, when you talk about Dean Smith, of course, I'm from North Carolina, just like you are, and we all know who Dean Smith is. Dean Smith, the most storied basketball coach in University of North Carolina history. So for those listeners who are younger who may not know, having Dean Smith in your corner, that's a pretty big deal. Ken, you play at Duke, which is one of the most storied, programs in all of college basketball. When you were playing at Duke, I was this is how big college basketball was in North Carolina. It's kind of like SEC football down here. We would be in school, like on a Thursday and Friday when the ACC tournament started. The teachers would roll TVs into the classroom so we could watch the tournament while it was going on. And I can remember, watching you and Jaminski and Banks and Spanarkel. And back then, Maryland had a good team. I remember, of course, you've been on ESPN about what you call the Buck Williams flop when everybody said you undercut him at the end of the game to win the ACC championship. But anyway, what I want to know is, all right, so, Duke being such a storied program, what's your biggest takeaway from playing Duke basketball?
One thing that the 4 years before Gene and I got to Duke, they had lost the first round of the ACC tournament every year, and they had losing seasons. So they were in last place. I don't know if they had losing seasons, but close. But they were in last place for 4 straight years and lost the first game of the ACC tournament. So going that freshman year from 0 to the Final Four championship game against Kentucky and almost having a chance to win was pretty amazing. So really the 12 years before Gene and I got there was really a dip in Duke basketball history, and it was tough times. Coach Foster and Lou Getz, who recently passed away, may he rest in power, and Bob Wenzel and Ray Jones, the coaches, really built something there that we were able to have we had 3 good years, and then Mike Krzyzewski came in and had to get his team in to really build it up. He wasn't immediately successful. In fact, his first couple of years after me, he had losing seasons and it was tough for him, but he got it going, and now they name stuff after him all over the place. So I take away from that, we were very fortunate. That 78 team was kind of the spark. If you think of, arguably it was the beginning of modern Duke basketball as it is today. Coach K came in and obviously had to rebuild on top of that because Bill Foster left after my junior year to go to South Carolina. Having said that, being part of the Duke Brotherhood, which is kind of the brand that when you've been someplace, 40 years now, he's like Dean was in his day, maybe even eclipsed Dean from a brotherhood standpoint, but you can't take away from Dean Smith. But I'm saying Coach K has done something that no one ever thought could be done at Duke. There was a few years in the 60s that were good, with the Mullins and Jack Marin and Verga and that crew, and Artie Heyman kind of started that off. But really, the 78 to 80 team, and then when Coach K came in and he really built his program, it's been the world to all of us. All the former players who played at Duke are very proud to be part of that, whether you played for Bill Foster or Coach K or even before, or even if you played JV. If you're part of the program, you have so much pride because of what it stands for. It's a clean program. Sure, you're going to have problems. You're going to have guys not happy. They transfer. That's just life. But overall, it's a very, very fine program and has the respect of people in the basketball industry. So every time I go out in business, I don't advertise. I go by Ken Dennard in business, so most people don't. Every now and then somebody goes, "You related to that Kenny Dennard guy?" I said, "Well, yeah, that was me when I had hair and I was 100 pounds ago, Not how many years, how many pounds. But it's really meant a lot to be part of the Duke Brotherhood. It's been so great.
All right, so Ken, after Duke, you get drafted in the NBA and you play for 3 years. All right, in that 3 years, what challenges did you deal with?
I got cut. The first year I got cut the day before the season started. It was kind of like a Hard Knocks episode where you get called in and the GM goes, "This is the toughest thing I've ever had to do. This is the hard part of the business." And "What do you mean I'm cut?" I'm in the press guide. I actually found that press guide the other day. I'm in the press guide. And, they only print one press guide a year back then. This isn't modern day. This is back then when they print one press guide. And I said, well, I thought I made the team. Well, you did make the team, but we've got two guys that we can't get rid of and they're guaranteed money. So you got to go until we can make a move. But I'm in the press guide. So anyway, I got cut and I went down and played for George Carl and the Montana Golden Nuggets. Played for George for a while until they made room and I got pulled back up to the NBA. I made the CBA All-Star team as playing center. And so I overcame going to the CBA. We would drive our own cars from Great Falls, Montana to Billings. We drive our own cars to the game. We'd take a caravan and they give us $15 a day plus some gas. We were making $250 a week. So I wanted to play in the NBA and I knew this was the way to do it. It was hard to go from NBA player, made the team, I'm in the press guide, to playing in a Salvation Army gym for practice in Great Falls, Montana. But I had perseverance. My family, back then my girlfriend, who's now my wife, Nadine, she moved out there with me and we struggled through it and got through it and got better. One of the things I mentioned to you earlier too is I have this motto throughout my whole life. I like to dream. I like to believe in that dream. I like to do. And then I have to repeat, because you can't have just one dream. Once you accomplish a dream, and I wanted to play high school, I wanted to play college, I wanted to play pro. I got back into pros and played for a couple of years. But when I was in the pros, wound up right before my second year and I had a chance to start, I had testicular cancer diagnosis and went through surgery and radiation therapy the week before training season started. That was tough. That was devastating. Fortunately, I had my wife and girlfriend then, and my parents came out and they got together finally. And, I worked my way back. I played 32 games that year, but then I had to sue them because they didn't pay me my salary while I was undergoing recovery from cancer. Pretty awful, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's not very nice. Well, did you win the lawsuit, I hope?
I did, but I had to ask to be traded. That's where Dean Smith comes back in. I was playing the summer after my second year in the NBA, and it was only like $50,000. My biggest contract was $85,000. It was like 55, 65, and 85 for 3 years. That was big money then, but think about it now. So they didn't pay me $50,000 that second year because they used a loophole. So I sued, and then I knew I had to be traded because I was suing them. And so Dean Smith saw me at Carolina when we were playing pickup games with all the other pros and other college guys. Michael Jordan was there then playing at Carolina, and Dean Smith and Doug Moe were there. And Dean told Doug to trade for me. That's how I got to Denver. And Carl Scheer was the general manager, who was a big Carolina guy. So they made the trade. And I'd also played for George Carl, who's a Carolina guy. And George hates new guys, but I think he likes me. But you never know, though, with George. But so I got traded over to Denver and played another year in the NBA right after I finished the 3-year contract, which none of it was guaranteed. I had to earn it. I finally got my arbitration. No team would have me come to training camp while I was when I did not have a contract. I had to sit on the sidelines and work out and whatever. Finally got the arbitration, did the arbitration, and went straight to Italy because I had an offer to play in Rome and made the Rome team. I didn't have that guaranteed. And when I'm over in Rome, I get the call from my agent, hey, you won your suit. So give me your bank account. I'll send you the money. So I got a little money out of it, which is nice, but I'll never work in this town again in the NBA, because you sue the NBA and you beat them. It's just, you get blackballed. That was something that I just had to come to grips with. So after my year in Italy, I decided I was going to go back, and I was short a few courses at Duke and I wanted to go back and graduate and get back on with my life. So I did that. I came home, my wife, Nadine, and I got married in 85, finished up school in 86, and then started the world of business. And I've had tremendous failures, but those were early days. And I learned from my mistakes, and I've been in this investor relations industry since 1989. I found a business that is just like sports. There's no finish line when you're talking about public companies and earnings and what have you done for me lately. It's very competitive like that.
Right. Well, and speaking of, some of the mistakes you made early on, you were telling me that you had to file for bankruptcy when you were 27 years old, and then
That's right.
Quite a learning experience. Tell the listeners about that story.
I came out of the pros. When I was in the pros, I was funding my brother, David, who was, what's the right word to say, astral projecting genius. He was a little bit different. And he would go off in his dreams and come back with these designs. And some of the designs had some real merit. And so I had filled out and paid for all the paperwork. I had patents in 7 or 8 countries for several, like a hat that turns into a tote bag and a vest that turns into a sleeping bag, the Hattersack and Sleepwalker. And the Sleepwalker logo was a snail because the snail carries his home on his back. It was pretty cool. So I sunk all my money into it and friends and family and lost a couple $100,000 doing it because it just, you got to have millions of dollars. I pitched Coleman. Anyway, I gave it a good college effort, but my accountant finally said, you got $8,000 left in your bank account after all that, and you can't make any of these people whole. So I filed Chapter 7 as an individual and as the company I had. And let me tell you, at 27 years old, when you've had a pretty good basketball career and you've gone places all over the world, you sit there in front of a bankruptcy judge. It's humbling. You have to go, okay, I'm ready. Let's start over. And believe me, in this world, you can start over. You can get a second chance. And the way our structure is, they don't put you in debtor's prison. They don't cut your hands off. So I started over. And a few years later, I found this industry called investor relations, and people took a chance on hiring me, and it fit. Yeah, I learned a lot about human nature through basketball, through the business opportunities that I had that didn't work. I learned a lot about how people are. I was a history major, and history has a lot to teach us when you look at it. You can sit there and think, okay, I don't need to worry about history, but history actually, when you encompass it, you can actually predict the future by watching other people's behavior and seeing where they've made mistakes or they're going down a path that you've seen others or yourself go down. That's not a good path. So you learn to avoid that mistake or those people. And it's just part of the evolution, I think, of trying to be the best person you can be.
Right. Well, and Ken, I want to circle back on something because you mentioned it almost in passing, but I think this is one of the most important parts of this podcast that I want to get out to the listeners. But I guess it's your kind of formula for life, the dream, believe, do, and repeat. You actually trademarked those 4 words in that order, right?
That's correct. With periods. Dream period, believe period, do period, and repeat period. Yes, okay. I own that registered trademark with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Okay.
And why were those 4 words in that order so important to you that you wanted to get them trademarked?
Because throughout my whole life, that's how it works. That's my formula. And I think it works for others. I mean, I'm not saying it works for everybody, but it certainly works for most of the people that I've talked to that have been successful. You have to dream something before you can even think about doing it. And you have to believe in that dream before you can do it. So you have to dream, and then you have to believe. You can't just dream and do. You have to believe. You have to give in. You have to know it and follow it and have that whole belief system motivated to that dream. And then you have to execute, okay? You're going to make mistakes, but you keep learning from those mistakes. And then once you achieve that dream, what have you done? I mean, a lot of people I know from former athletes that they haven't been able to, they're not bankrupt, they're not deadbeats in life, but they're not happy because they haven't created a new dream. When I got out of basketball, I had this Hattersack and Sleepwalker dream. Hey, it failed miserably, but I dreamed it, I believed in it, and I did it. Didn't work, so I went on to my next dream, and I learned how to get into corporate America. I dreamed it, I believed it. Who said a CEO was going to hire some guy who played basketball for most of his life? Yeah, I had an education, and I was a decently smart guy, I think. But who's going to take a risk on a guy like me unless I had the passion to believe it, that I could do this job, and learned it. And then after working for 3 companies, started my own company in 1997, which is the company that I still operate today. But, even on business, but I'm saying even on personal things, I worked on Coaches versus Cancer Board for 15 years from the start to, after a point where it was pretty much it was on autopilot. I don't mean to sound negative, but when you start up a fundraiser or you start up a charity and you're working with the people, there's ideas. You need to come up with this. Have you seen the Suits and Sneakers Week? They just had that. Well, we came up with that when I was back on the board. They had other different fundraising ideas. There's the 3-point, but I'm saying those types of things are different passions, but they have goals. They have dreams, and you believe them, you do them, and then you have to make new goals. So that's where that comes from. And there's like right now, I'm trying to figure out, once I get my vaccine, what's the next step? I've got a great business. I've got good people that work with me. What's the next challenge? Until I get my vaccines and we're through COVID, I'm still trying to figure out that next dream to take it into my 70s.
I got you. Well, Ken, as you talked about, we all make mistakes in life. Some are self-inflicted. Some things happen to us that are beyond our control to get thrust upon us. I mean, what advice would you give to listeners who are dealing with life's challenges?
Well, the one thing you have to have is a support system. You can't do it by yourself. So I've always said you got to be a friend to have a friend. You can't just want to take from people. In basketball and certain levels of any kind of competitive sport or success, acting, whatever, you just can't take. You have to give. So when you're out there and you're looking to change your life or do something or overcome adversity, you have to give of yourself first. Then things will come back to you. You have to be a friend to get a friend. You need support systems around you when you're struggling or when you're coming off adversity, because you can't do it alone. Grew up in a Southern Baptist church, but I'm not pounding the Bible on anybody's head, or I'm not putting anybody's religion on display. But whatever you believe in, there's something higher than us. There's something bigger than us. Coach K was great at that. He was motivating. Always be looking to do something that's bigger than yourself. Be part of something that's bigger than yourself. If it's all about you, it's not going to work out too well.
In my book, I talk about how important relationships are in life because I've been through it and I know how important a support system is. And I know just in going through life, you got to have people there in the bad times and you want to have people there in the good times to share things with. I mean, I think the way I said it in the book was you truly have to give a shit about the other person. You can't just, you can't be one of those, a lot of people will ask somebody on Monday, well, how was your weekend? And after about 10 seconds, you're telling them about your weekend. You're just asking them so you can tell them about you.
Yeah. And we live in a day and age now with social media and this, the absorption of the me or the self. It's a natural place that people fall into. But I think people that really want to explore relationships and explore growth, they have to either hit rock bottom. They have to go through some kind of trauma to snap them out of it so that they can actually change, or they don't change. And then they're not that much fun to be around. And I haven't read your book, but I look forward to it. So I'm going to read it.
Dave, I'm going to send you a copy.
Please do. Please do. I love motivational thoughts, motivational words, because we all have something to share. I think for me, I've never been a shy person. I've always been outgoing. I've always wanted to be inclusive. I've always wanted to love everybody. And, I'm not as concerned about everybody loving me, because if they don't, so what? That's fine. But I can love them. When I was in college, I was back at home in Winston-Salem at a bar right near the campus at Wake Forest over there by the Coliseum. It was some really diving a hole in the wall bar. And I was drinking a glass of wine because I thought that was pretty cool, right? And this guy comes up to me. He's about 5'9", and he's hammered. And he's going, "You're Kenny Dennard, aren't you?" I said, Yeah. How you doing, man? How's it going? "I can't stand you, buddy." I said, "Well, that's nice of you. You don't have to stand me. I'll just leave, or you want to leave. Which one is it?" He goes, and then he says a couple of bad words, and he takes the wine glass and breaks it on my head, up against the side of my head. It was red wine too, so it looked like blood almost. Everybody in the bar just held their breath, thought I was going to throw him through the window like Charles Barkley or something. And I said, "Hey, bartender, let me have another wine, please. And what are you drinking?" And I bought him a drink. And now he was my best friend the rest of the night. It's just how you react to some of that stuff sometimes that make you go, people may have fear and they may have angst and they may have whatever insecurities, but you don't have to egg them on.
Well, that guy I'm sure was watching you on TV growing up, probably hated Duke like a lot of people do. And, he runs into you being a celebrity and he probably this is his chance to kind of jump in your life. And unfortunately, he did it in a negative way.
But the thing was, it could have been awful. I could have gotten a fight, got arrested, been in the newspaper, all that stuff. But life's too short. Come on, man. I had a little blood dripping down the side of my head, but so what? All this angst right now, all this division. Gene Banks and I were probably the first real black-white boyfriends, if you wish, not in a gay way, but we shared love that people saw through the screen, or they saw when they came to a game. They saw us hug when they announced our team, you go out and shake hands with the other guy and run back to the foul line. We would always do this massive body slam hug because it gave us energy. We loved each other, and really enjoyed the 4 years we played together. That's the way life should be for everybody. There doesn't have to be all this angst and race and, religion and politics. Come on. We're Americans. We got the best life in the world. Nobody's losing their freedom over who gets elected president. So let's just get over it and move on. Come on.
Well, Kenny, I was going to say, wrapping up the show, I like to give everybody, their last chance to give their parting shots, but I think you just gave it.
Peace, love, and let's roll, baby. Let's go. Let's come out of this pandemic with a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and move forward together. We've got so much ahead of us as a society, as individuals. There's no reason to sit around and just one thing, turn off the news. Stay off, don't get your news from Twitter or Facebook. Read a newspaper, do something different. Don't just stick on one of your favorite news channels that is your echo chamber. Just relax. Let's go. We're all humans. We all should love each other. I know that sounds simplistic and idealistic, but that's the way I am.
Kenny, if somebody wants to keep up with you, I know you're on Facebook, but I think you said you had a podcast. If somebody wants to listen to that podcast, how do they do it?
Yeah, well, my nickname from college was Dog because I was a work dog. I did all the doggy stuff. So I have a podcast called Dogcasts from Undisclosed Locations because I live on a 45-foot motor coach. It's one of those tour buses. We moved here about a year ago in a place south of Houston in an undisclosed location. So you can go to www.dogcasts.co. There's 18 episodes, pretty interesting people. It's not a sports podcast. It's about mostly friends of mine and acquaintances that have been very successful in life. Many of them had gone to Duke years ago, and we've known each other forever. Actors, hedge fund managers, inventors, documentarians, directors, movie directors, music directors, lots of fun people. So dogcast.co.
Well, Kenny, I tell you, man, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show and telling your story and giving your insights, about living a great life and, overcome adversity and dealing with mistakes. It's been an absolute pleasure for me, especially because I've known of you, since I was in the 7th grade, and to have you on my podcast and us talking to each other, I mean, this has been fantastic for me.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been a real honor.
All right. Thanks so much.
You bet.
Wow, what a great show with Kenny Dennard. Dream, believe, do, repeat. What a great formula for life. Next week's guest is Greg Prevance. He'll tell you his story of alcohol and drug addiction and how it cost him the biggest acting opportunity of his career. But more importantly, he'll tell you how he overcame his addiction to live an honest and deeply enjoyable life. See you next week. Thanks for listening to the show. If you're interested in getting my book, Get Back Up, just go to Amazon and put in Get Back Up and my name, Rod Caden. It'll pop right up. I would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast and rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. I would really appreciate it if you'd share it with a friend. I would like as many people to hear my message as possible. And we'll see you next week. Never give up and always get back up.